When I graduated from business school, and when many people graduate, I think from business school, you have a perception of how the world works. Private equity for me broke that. It actually helped me see how the world doesn't work, how investment decisions, weren't as simple as just what did the business case and the model say. I got to see the vast difference between a stated strategy and actual execution.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Show. I'm your host, Mark MacLeod. In this episode, I sit down with Rob Khazzam, co-founder and CEO of Float Financial. Rob spent 5 pivotal years in a number of leadership roles at Uber, and that experience completely transformed him. He brought that relentless execution to Float, and as a result, it's now one of the fastest growing fintech companies in Canada, if not in the world. We unpack all of that experience in this episode. Lots of insights. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you subscribe. Rob, welcome to the Startup CEO Show. It's a true pleasure to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on the pod.
Yeah, much to discuss. I wanted to have you on for some time because you're running one of the preeminent fintech companies in Canada. And so there's lots to discuss, but maybe let's just start. I think there's many folks who maybe followed a similar path to you, right? Started out and kind of maybe more on the investment side and then made the switch. And so I'd love to hear from your standpoint, like how did that background serve you, and what parts did you bring with you, and what gaps did you need to fill in once you got to the operating side?
Yeah, sure. So, I was fortunate. I got to spend 5 years doing investing before I jumped into, operations or startups. And I'm glad I did. I think that the background was really helpful. So I did the 3 levels of the CFA program. I was the only analyst and then the only associate in a shop for that 5-year time period, with about 5 or 6 partners that I got to work with on deals. And so the benefits were you get a lot of reps building models, you get a lot of reps doing work, having your work critiqued, doing it again, and understanding how to work with a bunch of different personalities. And so that was really great experience. I also got to see a lot of different businesses. So, I got to look at probably a couple hundred different P&Ls and balance sheets, a couple hundred times a year. I got to look at least at a 1 or a 2 pager about a business and provide input on what I thought. Should we spend time here? And for me, that's the thing I've always enjoyed most, is having an opinion. I struggled in business school thinking about being in financial services or being in a sales role. I really like looking at a business, looking at financials, taking a point of view. And so that gave me, a lot of experience, a lot of confidence also as I started to formulate opinions. You're nervous, you're not sure about them. By the end of my time, that 5-year run in private equity, I had a lot still to learn about doing deals and businesses, but I really felt that foundation was helpful. And in the operating world, it served me really well.
That's amazing. So much learning, right? I was in public accounting doing auditing for a bunch of years, and auditing is deeply, painfully boring. And the thing that got me through it was the opportunity to learn about different businesses. It sounded like you had that on steroids. I have to say, I LinkedIn stalked you prior to this and really loved your description. I think it was Scotiabank you were in before this, where you're basically, the description is like, I mostly did not work. So I just love that.
Yeah, it's I look back fondly on the time, and I'm grateful that I got the experience, that people there were patient with me, and that I had an opportunity to learn about businesses. And I think the last thing I would say that was most helpful about that experience looking back is when I graduated from business school, and when many people graduate, I think from business school, you have a perception of how the world works. Private equity for me broke that. It actually helped me see how the world doesn't work, how investment decisions, weren't as simple as just what did the business case and the model say. I got to see the vast difference between a stated strategy and actual execution. And that was, I didn't realize it until I got to Uber, but really helped me formulate a view, which is strategy is easy, insights are easy, execution is really hard. And, coming to board meetings every 3 months, every 6 months, I began to feel really frustrated with the pace of execution. And that's when, the intellectual interest sort of met the heart in me, the soul, which is like, I want to do something about this. I don't want to keep coming to meetings talking about this strategy. Let's do it, and let's do it quickly. And understanding that that's a competitive advantage in business was not a perspective that I thought of when I entered the world from business school. So that was a great learning as well.
I love it. Yeah, listen, man, all the value is created through execution. You can have the fanciest strategy slides in the world, but that in itself creates exactly $0 of value. So all about execution. I'm curious, many investment firms have this may not have been the case at the time, but I see this a lot today, right? Where you come in, you get some experience, and then you go out and operate. Like you can't even get path to partner unless you've been on the other side. Was that a impetus for you to move, or it was literally just you were seeing this and you wanted to go and fix this kind of execution challenge?
No, I knew I wanted to leave. I think by the time, after being an associate for 2 years, I realized I sort of had an opportunity to keep going at that point and get on a partner track. And the firm I was at wasn't very operational heavy. So the partners there, only came from financial backgrounds. But, I was 28. And to be honest, I did have a flashback to my childhood. And I have always felt this entrepreneurial instinct, and also maybe this fear that I won't live up to that. And so to be honest, I do remember, I was 27, 28 years old thinking, this is great. I'm proud of my achievements here. I'm proud that I'm in this field. It's not something I ever dreamed of getting into, but now I want to be on the other side of the table. I want to be creating something, building something. I don't want to be part of a firm. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I want to be known as someone who makes their success through building things, building teams, building a business. And that's scary as hell, but it's kind of time to do that. And if I don't do that now, I probably never will. That was really what was going through my head. So it was not just leaving there, but kind of jumping into the abyss and getting in the deep end and daring myself to, make a change before, you get too far into a career that you can't leave. And I think everyone who's navigated those decisions knows as you get in your late 20s and your 30s, certainly, it's harder and harder to make those switches.
Fair enough. Yeah, I made a switch at 50, but I'm not being interviewed, so it doesn't matter.
Well, maybe at least in my mind, it felt like such a big deal. But you're right. As you get older, you realize you can always do this stuff.
I opened up an investment bank at 45 and shut it down and became a coach at 50. So, life happens. But anyway, so you talked about being thrown in the deep end, which is exactly the analogy that comes to mind when I think of Uber. And, you talk about the importance of execution, and from the outside in and everything I've read or heard about Uber, it sounded like a relentless execution machine and something that was just deeply, deeply competitive, to a fault. And so, just tell us about your experience there. Again, when I was LinkedIn stalking and I saw you were off in Europe, and I was just like, man, that must have been really lonely. But anyway, that's an aside. But just, what did you take from Uber?
Yeah. So, the background, I quit my job in April of 2014 or March of 2014. I started looking for a job in New York. I met Uber. I met a bunch of different startups, and long story short, Uber wouldn't hire me in New York, but I got introduced to this international launch team, and they had basically, said, look, we're not going to hire you in the US, but, we have this global team. There's 25 people on it. They get sent all over the world. You're alone the entire time. You work 7 days a week. There's no,
they really sold it to you.
You're the tip of the spear. And I thought it was sort of cheesy. The job description was they were making something of it. But then as I went further and further into the interview, it was no, this is serious. They're actually hey, you're going to get sent to Egypt, and then you can get sent to Pakistan, and then you can get sent to Prague, and then you get sent to wherever. And we're actually serious. So are you ready to do that? And, you go through the interview process and they're really thoughtful about interviewing, which I loved. And so long story short, I joined in May 2014. I got on a plane to Frankfurt. They told me, days before I joined where I was going. I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I knew the launch job. I knew that there was, a handful of people I got connected to that were like, I could reach out to, but the where I was going was really last minute. Got there, spent 3 weeks doing this Frankfurt launch, which was, pretty funny now looking back. And then that was it. And then it was truly my boss and 3 other launchers that had just started, the 3 of us together. He just said, this is a map of like EMEA. That was Europe, Middle East, Africa. That was the region we were in. And it was like, this is where you're going to be going. This is what you're going to be doing for the next 6 months. And it involved, where you were going to be living, not to mention working, and a really daunting job. So it was pretty mind blowing to think back to it. It was scary.
Is telling an employee you're going to work 7 days a week, is that even legal? Is that a legal employer practice? I'm not sure that it is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was so much working 7 days a week. It was more, and I did appreciate it. And I now look back on that and it taught me something, which is like, this is all in. Like, this is not, you're not in a job in San Francisco. Like, you're going to be in, the people that you're going to be working with. And I got introduced to some of them, like some of them are on their, 15th, 16th month touring the world, I remember thinking maybe this is too much. And then I'm glad I didn't. I was lucky I had mentors that just said, just go for it. If it doesn't work, you'll figure something else out. What's the worst that could happen? Those first few months were a really great experience. And Uber did a great job of removing the ego that we all enter startups with. And I think that, coming there, I'd done the CFA, I was getting up to VP, principal level in private equity. I thought I was a hotshot. And, I got there and I'll never forget like sitting in that office during the Frankfurt launch. And it was like, okay, well, should I build a model to market size? And it was like, well, no, right now we got to submit these tasks to the engineers to draw this geofence, like learn how to do this. And then, we need 1,000 chargers and 1,000 iPhones and 1,000 cables. Go to the mall and go get them. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Do you want me to source a supplier? And I was like, no, like we need this stuff in 2 fucking days. Get it and then come back and let us know when it's done and we'll cross it off the list. And then, I went and did that, scurried around Frankfurt for, a day and a half. And then it was like, okay, we need to print 1,000 cards to hand out to drivers. And I was like, should I find a company to do this? Surely someone else can. And it's like, no, do it and don't come back to the office until it's done. And it's done today. Like come back for dinner in the office with these in hand. Okay. And then the next time it's, okay, we need to find drivers. And it's like, okay, well, how do you find drivers? Should we get an agency? I was like, no, walk around the streets to where taxi drivers hang out and don't come back here until you got 20 drivers. And we all did that. The launchers did it. And then we ran, the onboarding. We'd sit in a conference room and it's like me personally talking to German drivers and scanning their documents and talking to them and teaching them how to use the app. And that was the first couple of weeks. And then that was it. That was all I got. We got that and a launch playbook, a Slack group of launchers who we could reach out to. The advice was there'll be someone doing what you're doing or that has done it in the last month or two online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in all these different countries and time zones. So use this group to your advantage. And that was what I remember when I left to fly to Eastern Europe was, I'm scared shitless, but I know I've got some people I can count on that are in the midst of launches a couple of weeks ahead of me and they'll help. And that was for a brief time period, comforting.
Did you miss your ivory tower of sitting in boardrooms and like, I don't know, pondering spreadsheets versus going to a mall to buy 1,000 iPhones?
I liked it. There was a swagger to Uber that, while all this was happening, there was a swagger, which was everyone was like, well, but we're going to win. So even then, within the first week or two, I felt swagger. Like, I'm on a mission, I'm making this thing happen. When I'm walking to the mall in Frankfurt, I'm not like walking slowly, like I'm speeding, I'm racing. And there's a momentum throughout the company that done is better than perfect. Get shit done, get moving. It didn't even need to be said like, oh, we're going to work late tonight. The whole company was in 24/7. It wasn't, and I don't mean in the office. I mean, like they were in it. Like, there was a sense that time was being measured in hours, and that was infectious. And I think that was something that infused a lot of energy in me, even though I was nervous. And so those first few weeks I got sent to Prague, and I got sent to Prague basically to launch, and it was like, launch Prague and, can you do it in 8 weeks? And I was like, no, I want to do it in 10. And they're like, well, this other launcher did it in 6. So, you're sort of negotiating for how long you're going to get. And then you go there, and then you have a backlog of like literally 100 things to do. And, I very quickly got overwhelmed and made all the mistakes you make, but that was the beginning of that journey.
Do you think it changed you permanently, how you operate?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that time period, that first launch, that feeling of there's a clock ticking somewhere and I have all this stuff to do. And if I'm really fierce, I can get most of them done well enough to launch. And that changed me for sure. I mean, I think that was that 18-month period was one of extreme loneliness. I was alone almost the entire time. And if I was with people, it was for a day or two, and then I was alone again. And it hardened me. A lot of things go wrong, and you cry and you weep and you feel anxious, and then you call someone and, at the company, and they give you a tip and talk you off the ledge, and then you keep going. And I think doing that over and over and over again, over 18 months, hardened me in some good ways. In some ways I've tried to unlearn, but it taught me you can achieve a lot. You can achieve a lot by saying, no, I'll figure it out. I remember we had a saying, we'd walk around these cities as launchers, and, you're recruiting people, you got to hire a marketing manager. You got to get a meeting at the Ministry of Transport. You got to get an office. You got to, believe it or not, it took me 3 weeks to get an office lease in Prague because the bureaucracy in the country, I couldn't get the legal entities, the signing authority. This is such a small thing. That was my biggest headache for a period of 3 weeks. And you think you're never going to actually overcome this stuff. And you just keep finding ways to making it happen. And I remember people saying, again, it was a saying famous on the launch team, which is everywhere in the world, people were telling us, it'll never work here. Trust me, son. In Prague, you don't want to screw around with taxis. We know what Uber's doing. Not trust us, not here. And there was this balance of like naivety and maybe confidence, arrogance, not knowing better, some combination of all of them, where you just said like, yeah, I will. And this city is going to launch, and wait till you see what's going to happen. And that was a great lesson to see that like you can will your way to great outcomes. And Uber was time and time again, just stories of willing our ways to outcomes that felt impossible, at least on the ground in the markets I was in. It really felt impossible quite often.
Do you ever worry you were going to end up in a foreign jail?
There was some interesting moments. Yeah. I mean, Hungary is an interesting place. It was a really interesting part of the world, Hungary and Ukraine, Belarus, very, very different approaches to these topics. American companies, unpopular enough in some parts of that world. And then you add on the taxation regime, the fact that Uber's taking taxi drivers' jobs. We encountered a lot of resistance, but again, like hardened me, which is, okay, Uber has these great things. They have a great app. We have this great stuff. We have money. We have a lot of things, but like the service is still illegal in a handful of countries. We still have people chasing us. We still have government actors and people affiliated with the taxi industry that are tied to unionized workforces, trying to get in our way. And again, it was fun. I felt like I was at a Smile novel at times, but it was a blast. And again, the thing I took away from Uber was like swagger, and that's that belief, like we can make something happen. we had people showing up at our onboardings and they would intimidate us physically and the drivers that came to sign up for Uber. And so what did we do? We made up a fake ride sharing service. I made up fake Facebook communities to say we were building a ride sharing service, but not under the name Uber. We hired security. I had 24/7 security. A lot of launchers did that we would bring to protect the offices. We'd put false information out there about where our office location was. And there was a bit of a cat and mouse game, which, it made the journey interesting and definitely fun.
That's wild. Crazy. I gotta say, the very first time I went to continental Europe, I went to Amsterdam and it was all lovely and friendly. And then I went to Budapest and I got off from the airport and like the police officers are there with like machine guns. You're in a different.
My one of the best parts about being a launcher was our first job was to go get ripped off by taxi companies. So we'd fly to a city where Uber didn't exist, and someone like me would go there and spend 2 or 3 days doing this green light trip. And the first thing we do is look like a tourist, which is pretty easy, and then they get a ride to the city center and do it with a bunch of different companies to and from the airport and figure out what the hell's going on. And you start to find the devices and the gear shifter and these little hacks. And we did a series with an undercover journalist in Prague at the time of the launch to expose taxis. So there was all sorts of crazy stuff going on, but also a lot of people that wanted it there. And so it was. I'm a student of history. I studied world politics and geopolitics a lot in growing up and still do. And so being there and seeing what I'd studied in, post World War II, the Cold War, and then building a business there was just, it was really fascinating.
Amazing. I feel like we could spend the entire podcast unpacking that, but that's not why we're here. I want to talk about Float. Maybe first of all, for folks who are listening, just tell folks what Float is.
So Float builds software and products that simplify the entire process of spending, whether that be on corporate cards, whether that be through wire transfers, reimbursing your team for expenses. We offer a platform that makes that whole experience really seamless and automated for small businesses. We've been around for a couple of years now. We have 3,000 customers across Canada and about 85 people, 90 people across Canada helping us build against this mission.
Amazing. As I understand, you were brought in pretty early. There were some initial technical founders, but then you were brought in. How did that all happen?
Yeah. So after my time at Uber, I was looking for what was next and, doing what everyone does, meeting people and going for coffees and trying to find their next job, and whether it was joining something or partnering, I didn't know, but I was fortunate. I got a call from Jamie Rosenblatt from Golden Ventures, and he said, hey, we've got a pre-seed investment into this company. It's called Journal. There's 2 founders there and they're looking for a third. They've been building for a while now. We think they're onto something, but they need a third. They need someone to lead the company. But we think there's something really, really great there. Why don't you meet them? And so he introduced me to them, and over really a 2 or 3 month time span, I got to know them, and they showed me what they were working on, and I told them about myself, and we talked about business finance in Canada and what it looked like. And we bonded over shared experiences that we all had as employees. My time in Eastern Europe with expense reports. I had this, 150,000 euro expense report in February of 2015, and it led me down a multi-month process of getting reimbursed and going through this really painful process. And they shared the same experiences they had at Uber and Shopify.
Oh, they worked at Uber as well?
They were the top. Well, when I met them, they were the top Waterloo grads. They're the top of the class grads that chose to not get a job in New York at a hedge fund or Shopify. They chose to build something. But in their internships, their co-ops, they did each a stint at Uber and Shopify. And so that was the background that I had when I met them. Griffin was still in school. Ruslan, my other co-founder, had graduated. But we bonded over, the shared passion for that problem. And, they had a product. I'll never forget, they showed it to me. They said, so you had this, problem with expense reports, wouldn't it be great? And then they sort of like turned the laptop around and they showed me, I think it was 2 things. It was an employee requesting spending from their manager in Slack, the manager is saying like, thumbs up, and it instantly issuing you like a single use virtual card. And then they actually created a virtual card for me and showed it to me. And they said like, you can buy something on Amazon. And that was, for me, when I saw what the product already, what they had built could do, the issuing technology and what it enabled, and then the bond that we had developed, that's where it all sort of started. And I decided to, we got together more often, and then decided to join full time after about, I think it was 8 or 9 weeks of getting to know each other.
So they weren't in market when you joined. You led the go to market launch initially.
Effectively, yeah. They, to their credit, like they had done a lot. They had been working for one of the stories I tell people always is, why did what led to us working together? And I mentioned the product. I mentioned the passion for the problem space. They were and are relentless. So when I met them, they said like, so if you're interested, it'd be great. Let us know what you think. Like, we'll add you to this stand up if you want to help out. Like, we meet every day, and they added me to this stand up. And, I think back to my Uber days, it was like an 8:30 a.m. stand up 7 days a week. And it'd been going for like, over a year. And I was like, okay, that's the kind of energy that I want to be around. And those are the kinds of people that, that's the level of commitment that's required to build something. So that's something that I remember fondly, but, they had already a couple of beta customers. So what they had done, they were really smart. They'd gone to, Kirk Simpson from Wave. They'd gone to a handful of other small business owners or startup CEOs or finance teams and said, we're trying to research this problem. They researched a bunch of them. And so they were showing them either beta versions of the product or product designs. And so when I joined, I didn't really know where it would go, but I could see that they had like a small captive number of companies that were giving them some feedback. So when I joined, that allowed us to allowed me to evaluate over, 4 to 6, 8 weeks. Is this good enough to take to market? Should we, do a broader push? Should we hire our first, staff now and do a broader sales buildup? And that's what we started to do in the spring of 2021. But they were really looking for someone to come in to lead the company. And that was something they were upfront about, which was we want someone to come in to lead the company, to deal with the board and investors and build up the company so that we can focus on building the best product.
They smartly dodged the toughest job around, which is why I only coach CEOs. Back in my operating days, I was offered a CEO role twice. And it's funny, when I first entered the startup world, I thought I wanted to be a CEO, and that went out of my way to try and learn all these things beyond finance. And I would run HR, support, biz dev. I ran engineering for 1 week while my CEO was on holiday, and I was so grateful when he came back because that was just a disaster. But I quickly realized I didn't want to be the CEO. And when I was offered that job both times, I turned it down flat. So good on them. They were very insightful to pass you the hot potato there.
Yeah, I think it actually it's a rare thing for I think teams to not get protective and defensive over roles and responsibilities. And one of the things that I felt really blessed about is that my co-founders, and not just my co-founders, but really all of the leaders that I work with at Float they are so passionate about winning and succeeding that it's always about like what the company needs. And I don't just say that. I mean, I remember in our, second meeting, they were like, I was like, it was a bit awkward, like, well, does one of you want to be the CEO? Did like the board or your investors make you do this? And they actually said, no, the reason that this, happened, we think that the trajectory of the company would be better off if we brought someone in like yourself. We don't think we're best to do that. And we care a lot about who this person is. So they interviewed me, they cared, but they were really serious. Like, great, now take care of that and we'll take care of this and let's get back to work. And I really think that's a rare thing to find in teams and especially young people. And I'm grateful that they did that. It actually made my entrance into the business a lot easier. Sorry. And I think that was really important to our success.
Amazing. So it sounds like these guys have an intensity and relentlessness that you were used to from Uber. And so I'm wondering, to what extent what practices from Uber, or what, I don't know, values, ways of operating have you imported from Uber to Float?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. And Griffin and Ruslan and I did talk about those early, like what are those couple of things? And we charted, we shared GDocs of, thoughts on values and principles of working together. And the things that I took and that I think are definitely embodied in Float, whether they're directly attributable to Uber or we've come up with them ourselves or people we've hired and our own co-founders have come up with, I think one is a real genuine bias for action and urgency. I mean, everyone says that in startups, but there's levels of what that means and levels of intensity. And I think that I point to that example, the spirit of that 7-day-a-week daily stand-up. Not to say that that's a practice that everyone should use, but the idea that you're daily accountable. Like you do a daily stand-up, like here's what I'm going to get done today. And then the next day you're like, I got it done. I'm had a pretty good week. And we did that with our first 20 employees. Every week, everyone would communicate at 9 a.m. what were the kills or dies for that week for them personally. Like, what were they going to kill or would kill them? A bit of a metaphor, but like, what am I going to finish this week? Not, I'm going to work on something, but I'm going to finish.
Those words set the tone.
Yeah, I'm going to finish this task. Yeah. I think that attitude of like, I'm going to get something done every day is really, really important. Customer obsession. I saw that from the very beginning. Ruslan and Griffin were relentlessly customer obsessed. I've been deeply influenced by, reading about Amazon and their shareholder letters. And I think that customer obsession is really, really important, and it's hard to maintain as the company grows. And that was something that I saw them living, and how they were already in Slack groups with customers and talking to them daily. And those were practices we've continued. Learning and growing. I think this idea that in a startup, it doesn't matter how good you are. If the company's succeeding, you got to be 50 to 60 to 70% better every year. And so on the one hand, you want to hire great people, and I'll talk about talent density in a minute, but it's not enough to just be great in 2021, with whatever you're running or whatever you're doing. The attitude has to be like, I'm going to get challenged. I'm going to have an egg on my face, and I'm going to need to get better because the business is going to grow and my role is going to evolve and the challenges are going to change. And so not just a capacity to learn and grow, but evidence that you've done it, evidence that you like doing hard things, evidence that you can take direct feedback. If I think about the humility my co-founders showed, I think the spirit of Float is one where everyone, no matter who you are, can acknowledge, I got to be better in this area. And I think that that's a really important element of development trajectory to keep hiring people and having them keep scale. You need to see great competence, great pedigree, great experience, but humility and a willingness to be vulnerable and run towards learnings. And I think the last one is just the idea of talent density. And I think we talked a lot about that when I joined them. They said, what do you think you'll be spending your time on? And I said, well, assuming the product works and the first, 20 or 30 customers we bring on use it, and we raise our seed, which we figured we would do over the next 2 or 3 months. Like, I'm going to be hiring. Like, that's my work. I'm going to be spending 70% of my time hiring in some cases. And so will you probably over the next year or two. And they thought that was crazy. And I said, oh, if we're doing this together, you're going to learn how to recruit properly, and we're going to learn how to interview properly. And we are going to be very intentional about who we bring into the company and why we're bringing them into the company and for what reason and on what understanding and what values we're tied to. And that one, I think, has been really important. Not just the idea of we want to hire great people, we want talent density, but the commitment to a philosophy about how to do that. And Griffin and Ruslan, my co-founders early on, were very committed to that. Knew like, we don't know how to do this necessarily, but this is really important. And that's been a really big hallmark of our culture and how we've built the company so far.
This episode is brought to you by Fellow. Fellow is the only AI meeting management solution that covers every part of your organization's meeting workflow. Go to fellow.app/CEO to get 300 free minutes of AI recordings and start having better meetings.
I'm sure anyone listening resonates with that. Anyone who's gotten into scaling realizes how critical hiring is and also how challenging it is. So I'm curious, other than putting the reps in and screwing up, how did you become excellent at hiring? What did you do outside of that to accelerate that?
Yeah, I mean, at first very little, because that first few months we didn't have much hiring actually to do. But then once the product started moving and we could see there was product market fit, and we could see the round was coming, we started by just trying to do a lot of outreach. Like what I saw pretty clearly was there was no brand. No one knew about the company. I had a bit of a network in Canada, but it was only enough at that stage. And we were desperate to hire engineers. So I showed them the sort of like operational excellence of recruiting that I had learned, which was pound the pavement. You want to hire one engineer. Well, you better book 10 coffees and you better do 100 outreaches. And we got really good at measuring the inputs to recruiting. So we were very militant about organizing outbound sourcing email campaigns from all three of us. We were diligent about making sure that each week we had clear next steps with candidates. I'm going to bring this person in for coffee and I'm going to do it in 2 days. I'm not going to wait another week. We nudged that stuff all along, but it wasn't enough. And we did have a lot of challenges hiring in those early days. We really struggled with engineering. And then we started to step it up and do a lot more employer branding. And I think that was a decision from my time at Uber and also seeing what was going on in startups in 2021 in the US was a great opportunity to build some buzz around what we were doing. And so it was a bit, counterintuitive as a startup to be doing it. But we spent, I think I spent $40,000, $30,000 in the summer of 2021. We rebranded the company and the name of the company and the website. And we also filmed recruiting videos. We filmed interviews with our first 10 employees. We interviewed them about working at Float. We recorded snippets of us talking about our product and our mission and our cultural values. And we started really working hard to get into different talent markets. So when we would post a role, everyone at the company would post it. We'd tag people we knew. And so getting from 5 people to 10 to 25, that was a very, very intensive process of, building an employer brand foundation, trying to be smart about creating a little bit of virality and branding around the people we had hired. And then just a lot of time for me building relationships. I took most of the senior leaders at Float, whether they met me and interviewed or applied for a job or I outbounded to them, I went on walks, and met some of the family members of a lot of the senior leaders that joined Float. It took me 3, 6, 9 months in some cases to recruit those people. And I still recruit, a year or two ahead. And I tried to be pretty genuine about that. So as I recruited for product or engineering or different functions, it was, I want to find the best, but I'm going to just reach out to the best and say transparently, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to find someone. I'm really curious if you could help me. If you have any suggestions, I'd love to compare notes. And a third of the time, half the time that led to, well, I'm interested in learning more, or I might know someone that knows more. And if you do that a couple thousand times, then good things happen. And I think that was really what that first 2 years for me was really all about. It was mostly recruiting.
I love it. So the themes that are standing out for me so far, starts off with learning, right? Private equity, I'm looking at 100, 200 P&Ls a year. I'm learning. Uber, learning on steroids, and then kind of massive execution. And you brought the massive execution to Float. And, from the outside looking in, Float seems like a rocket ship. You've got a tier 1 Canadian investor in the form of Golden, tier 1 global investor in the form of Tiger Global. Is it that, what do you attribute the kind of massive growth to? Is it just that relentless execution, or were there other kind of aspects that are worth touching on?
Well, I'll start by maybe bursting the bubble of that everything is going right. I mean, I think.
I don't expect that. I don't expect that. Every company's got issues, right? But
our float is still an infant. I think it's important. We're 3.5 years in, and so we're proud of where we've come, but we've got a long way to go. And staying humble and disciplined about where we are and avoiding complacency is important. But I think a lot of things, we've been lucky. You need a lot of luck in startups. How many things aligned for us? We got financed in 2021, which is a great time to do it.
Great.
I met my co-founders because I, had a board relationship that had a product that they had already built and an MVP that was really well timed. And I think what we should take credit for, or at least we celebrate that we've been able to do, but is important, we have to do every day, is to recruit outstanding world-class people who are really passionate about solving the problems that we solve. Like I didn't mention it in the values, but you have to be passionate about what you do to succeed in startups, because anyone else would just give up. And so what's embedded in all of this, I've described, all this work, recruiting people that actually find this stuff fun and interesting and want to solve customers' problems and want to compete to have the highest quality bar for customers and provide customer service, even at, 1 a.m. on a Friday night. I think it's been the commitment to recruiting great people who are genuinely passionate and committed to that mission. And being fortunate that we have customers that have been patient with us and have shown loyalty to us, because we make mistakes along the way. So I think those are the things that help you create success out of nothing, and continuing to double down on that as the company changes, because change is always a constant. And I think that you do need to have that long-term commitment, because there are a lot of moments that are frankly really painful, a lot of great ones, but a lot of hard ones. And you need to genuinely want to create a better landscape for businesses in Canada, better B2B finance, modern rails. If you're not passionate about that, it's you're not going to go far.
Now, tell me a little bit about the decision to focus on Canada, right? Because the knock on the Canadian market often is that it doesn't do something unless its peers in the US have done it. And, so I guess what made you decide to focus on Canada, or said another way, what made you decide not to focus on the US?
Yeah. I mean, we have a genuine, real, we feel a real, genuine mission to serve Canadian businesses better. I mean, I think I was frustrated when I left Uber as an employee, thinking about where am I going to work in Canada that I can make an impact that I see here, not in the US. And as a citizen, as a resident, as a voter, I think we all share a huge amount of pride and frustration, frankly, that the Canadian finance ecosystem is not working for all businesses. It's not keeping up with the US. And I think there's a real sense of pride, frankly, that we want to be the ones to do that in Canada for Canadian companies. And we, more importantly, really believe that in order to do that, you have to build Canada first. Like, you have to actually, it's not just a software application layer. You do need to build really strong banking relationships here. You do need compliance programs. You do need to be close to customers. And so we saw very, very quickly that the market needed it. And we really felt that, as we've seen and studied in other markets, and I studied a lot of case studies in other business industries where you have American companies come to Canada and compete, where that hasn't resulted in the kinds of industry change and innovation that we all read about and want to see here. And so there's a real genuine pride in that. And we do believe the market is substantial. There's $5 trillion of B2B payment volume every year in Canada. And the long-term trends around payment modernization and business banking modernization, they're not changing. No matter what happens in the next year or two in the industry, the move towards modern business banking, modern business payments is going to happen. And we want to be the ones to marshal that into the industry in Canada and to help unlock what feels like it's missing in Canada, which is a level of innovation that transcends just software. It actually applies to how money moves. And we're fired up about that.
Amazing. I have to imagine that a decent chunk of that 5 trillion is floating through Schedule I banks. And so at what point do you, I don't know, is it David versus Goliath and you take these guys on?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that we want to do a lot of things that the banks, we want to offer a lot of things that the banks offer today in a manner that we think is really outdated. So there's no question we are positioned as a company that thinks there's a simpler way and looks at the way that banking today operates in Canada, the way that card payments operate in Canada today, the way that wholesale aspects of the finance department are hugely outdated. And it's a source of real motivation. It doesn't have to be this difficult. And, I see the narratives in Canada now, about modern banking and real-time rails, and everyone's sitting around waiting for someone else to do something. It's like the government's going to do it and the banks will do it. And, these associations will do it, to hell with it. Like, if we can help them do it, great. But we're not going to wait for that. We're just going to do it ourselves, and we'll figure out how to make it happen. And if we have to partner, we'll partner. And if we have to build it ourselves, we'll build it ourselves. And if we have to, frankly, hire, GPTs and humans to auto categorize all of the manual transactions of our customers and use technology to do that, and we have to become a licensed, regulatorily compliant entity in Canada to do this stuff, we'll do it. We'll do all of it to work backwards from that experience we really want to enable here, which is the ability to pay any vendor in the world globally instantly.
Wow.
The ability
that'd be amazing.
Access capital instantly, not in a 4, 6, 8 week engagement with a bank, but through an accounting connection, through a bank account connection, through software that can read your financial statements and very, very quickly determine what level of credit you can access and deploy to invest more in your business. And great automations that eliminate all of the hassles of managing spending and help finance teams across the country spend more of their time informing strategic decisions, strategic investments. How do we be more productive as a company? How do we grow our revenue faster as a company? As opposed to, hey, the sales team went to, Nashville for a week and we got a backlog of transactions to reconcile. So those are the things that we're fired up to do. And there are simpler ways to make these things happen. Canada, in my view, has to dream bigger, and we have to stop settling for the service quality that we've become accustomed to in this country.
Amen. I'm all over that. Even my tiny little business, I have my chief of staff is in Colombia, and I can't pay him directly, right? I can't pay him through my bank. I have to do this kludgy process and send the documents to his bank so they don't feel like there's some money laundering BS going on. Yeah, it's such a hassle. When I was hearing you talk about your 18-month stint in Europe, and just how intense that was, and how you basically none of the launchers, you're alone, you never had time off. What came up for me were like soldiers in theater, and soldiers in the theater do so for short periods of time, and they come back and they have PTSD and they need to recover, and then you kind of go right from Uber right into this. And so I'm wondering, I don't know, do you have PTSD? Like, what's the state of your mind? Do you have the capacity to be happy, or are you just always intense?
Yeah, it's evolved. Like I was I was with Uber for 5 years, and I had, there was 3 jobs. There was the launch job, then there was the GM for Central and Eastern Europe job, and then there was the GM for Canada. And when I became the GM for Central and Eastern Europe, I had to unlearn some of that. So that, after that 18 months, I was still out there for 2 years. And now I was managing GMs and bigger businesses and working with more experienced stakeholders. And I did have to learn how to taper some of that back, that not everything is about execution. Strategic thinking is important. Building trust is important. Taking the time to strengthen interpersonal relationships above and beyond the OKRs or the goals on the page are important. And I think I'm still learning that, and my time as a GM helped me soften and round that skill, and also learn how to be mentally healthier. I learned to, working 7 days a week is not admirable, and you may need to do it a bit, but you're probably not going to show up very effectively as a leader if you're thinking and looking and acting in an adrenaline fueled way all the time. And so it has been a gradual process of learning how to harness the good parts of that experience, while also being more strategic over time. And I think Uber also, that was a great experience. My last years at Uber was that. It was everybody, the message in the company was everybody chill the hell out. Like, let's take a step back here and actually get off the hamster wheel for a minute and really be strategic. What are we trying to achieve? How can we best achieve that? Not just next month, but over the next year. And I'm grateful that I've had that experience and worked with people that have helped me see that. So the leaders I work with now, they are all in, but they push me. They give me great feedback about how I can be a better leader. And so those have been great learnings. And I think on a personal level, you also realize that the sacrifices and commitments you make in a business are real. And so there's nothing wrong with making them, but you've got to be happy personally. And whatever that means, if it's, dating or going to the gym or, making sure that you take time off, you need to fulfill those other parts of your life, or else you won't show up and be the best leader you can be. Maybe you'll do good documents. Maybe you'll send okay emails, but you're not going to inspire people, and you're not going to build the kinds of momentum as a team, optimistic, positive, positive culture that you need to cultivate if all you're talking about is, we got to hit this goal and done is better than perfect. And, everything has got to be intense 24 hours a day.
Right. So do you feel like you have sufficient boundaries? Like, is your life sustainable?
I think my life is sustainable. I mean, I love what I do. My life's sustainable because I love what I do. I'm really blessed. I would rather be working on and doing what I'm doing than anything else in the world. There's nothing I would rather be doing than what I'm doing. So is it a lot sometimes? Sure. And is it a lot for everyone at the company? Often, sure. But it's worth it. We love doing it. I love doing it because we have this fortunate opportunity to build something, everlasting that hopefully is around for a lot longer than I am. And that's special. I mean, I could spend the rest of my years chasing an opportunity like that. So I actually feel really grateful that I've had the opportunity to have these experiences and to be working with the people I work with at Float, to be serving the customers that we serve is incredibly inspiring and rewarding. So I don't feel bad. I don't like people feeling bad for me. I get to do something I love every day. And things that are worthwhile are hard. And so I'm also motivated by, with that opportunity comes pressure and the fear of failure. And the best antidote to the fear of failure is hustle. It's work. It's preparation.
I love it. Now, that intensity, right? I only coach CEOs. A CEO who's especially a founder has more context, but also more motivation than anyone else, right? It's their company, their identity's tied up to it. They are a meaningful, participant in the cap table. I'm wondering how you translate that intensity to the rest of your team who don't necessarily have that same motivation, and where if you dial it up too much, they just check out and go somewhere else.
It starts with who you hire. And I mean, we hire very intentionally, which is we only hire people that really give a shit. I mean, we don't hire people who are just passively interested in what we're doing. And if we do, they generally won't have success or may not last very long. So I demand and expect commitment, accountability, ownership, and passion in the people that I recruit. And it makes it a lot easier because I actually don't think it's fair to demand that from someone. If they don't want to be like that, they aren't that committed, it would be absurd to expect it of them. So for me, it starts with recruiting and understanding the people I'm hiring. Well, why do they want to do this? Are they genuinely interested in it, or do they see it as a way to get rich quick, or, a cool job title? And I think that really helps. Who you start with is a huge, probably the highest leverage decision I make as a leader. And then in terms of working with them, what I try to instill is a sense of pace, a sense of ownership, and ridiculously high standards, really high standards that no matter what progress we're making, we can always be better. We can always grow more. We can always do a little bit better. And to try to be the person that can call attention to when we are meeting that and recognizing it and celebrating it. And then also being willing to hold people accountable when we're not even. And sometimes that may mean pace, hey, we're not moving fast enough, folks. Like I know we're on track for the quarter, but this stuff's moving at a snail's pace. What is going on? Being willing to challenge people and amp it up, as Frank Slootman would say, I think has been important. But I've definitely learned a lot of really important lessons about not overdoing that. And I probably relearn that lesson, once or twice or three times a year where I'll overdo it. And then it's an opportunity for me to take a step back and say, how was I too intense in this situation? And how did it contribute, for example, to an erosion, chipping away of psychological safety? If Rob is too intense for a month or two, and accountability, I might find in the subsequent months that people are afraid to fail, that we aren't making those big, bold bets. People aren't being vulnerable. And then I look around and go, well, how did I contribute to that? How can I be better and be more nuanced in how I'm an intense leader? And that's something, I don't think I'll ever be done working on, to be honest.
No, endless layers to that onion, that's for sure. Maybe last question as we start to wrap up, Rob. Fintech is generally go big or go home. And, it just takes real scale for these things to work. And, when I think about your category, I think about Brex and kind of burnt its way to greatness and that consumed a lot of capital, did a pivot kind of pretty far into that journey. Just curious, what have you learned? Have you studied Brex at all? Do you draw any cautionary tales from them? And also just, you've committed to this path now of capital. How do you think generally about kind of consumption of capital as you try and achieve kind of big scale here?
Yeah, this is one area where I'm grateful, if we come full circle to the beginning of the interview, the financial experience and that intellectual curiosity and truth seeking and financial background was really helpful. And even in my time at Uber. And I think that if I apply what I've learned in startups against the backdrop of the financial experience, it's that there are great opportunities in technology, huge opportunities. And you have to understand, how big your opportunity is, what sort of, how important is scale, depending on what business you're in, what are the unit economics of your business. And I think you can make really big bets. I think that's one of the best things about the startup and entrepreneurial industry is you can raise tens of millions of dollars and make these big, important multi-year investments and try things that may not work out, but where the upside is asymmetrical. Where can I invest $1 million, but create a $25 million revenue business? I think that's a great aspect of the startup industry. There's always the downside, which is there's been a lot of exuberance. Float did a big Series A. People would point to that if I pick a self, like one of our own examples. But, Brex did a huge rounds. Uber certainly had raised a huge amount of money. We've seen that with that, a lot of waste, a lot of excess, a lot of mistaking subsidies for, product and traction. And so we've tried to find the balance. I don't know that we ever do it perfectly. I think we're probably pursuing growth too aggressively and then pursuing efficiency too aggressively and trying to find somewhere in between. But the lessons from Uber were significant, which are the second half of my time there. We had to unwind a lot of the things we did that were not very smart. We did waste a lot of money and we did miss opportunities to say, okay, we're doing this now, but this is not sustainable. We need to figure out another way to do this. There's a more sustainable way to build something. And I think that there are plenty of examples of that over the last couple of years. If you look at building really bloated teams, running campaigns that are massively promoting and discounting products, and the erosion of your value proposition to customers, over hiring. We've made all of those mistakes as well. But I think that those are the things that I look at and say, how can we be really aggressive about the investments we want to make, those asymmetrical bets where it's actually very, very attractive to make a multi-million-dollar investment. And then where are the areas where we're just not ready yet? Hey, we're not ready to hire 70 people in our sales team. We're still figuring out how to operate it at, say, 25. We want to go bigger. We want to go faster. Maybe that means we'll experiment, but let's not build an army of people to run a function that we haven't figured out how to optimize yet. And I think that that's the stuff that I try to keep in the back of my mind and straddle that line of being long-term, being aggressive and ambitious, but taking really that long-term shareholder mindset. And maybe to close, I think being realistic and true to yourself about equity value per share, not valuation, not dollars raised, equity value per share that you're creating for all of your shareholders. And I think the more that we all stay anchored to that and not the pref price, not the valuation of the overall company, I think if you think through that lens, it changes how you make financial decisions as a founder, and it should.
Amazing. I love that. Wise words. I got to say, I've always kind of said no one wins unless the common shareholders win. Yes, I've got my pref as an institutional investor, but if I'm exercising it, it wasn't a win, right? By definition, if that investment is a win, I've converted to common. So I love that you're thinking about all the shares.
Long-term value creation. Yeah.
I've learned a ton on this discussion. It could have been a lot longer. We probably could have just done an hour on Uber and then an hour on what it means to execute relentlessly inside a fintech company. We probably could have done an hour on Canada and whether it's competitive or not. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Startup CEO Show. If you'd like to connect with me, be sure to visit my website at markmacleod.me or follow me on LinkedIn at @the_Mark_MacLeod or Twitter at @markmacleod_. And if you want to tune in again next week, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.